Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the seventh masterclass of the India Forum for Nature-Based Solutions Masterclass series. As people are joining in, let's just start with a brief introduction of the forum. Today's session is also focusing on sensitization on heat action planning and the role of nature-based solutions. I'm Shaura Mal, and I support the Secretariat for the India Forum for NbS. Um, the forum, the India Forum for Nature-Based Solutions is a coalition of research, practice, and finance organizations committed to scaling up the adoption of NBS to shape climate-resilient cities and communities in India. Through knowledge sharing and discussions like this masterclass series, we aim to equip stakeholders with practical insights and strategies to implement NBS effectively. For this masterclass in particular, our focus is on introducing heat action planning. As global temperatures rise and extreme heat events become more frequent, India faces significant challenges, including threats to human health, economic productivity, and ecosystem stability. Vulnerable communities, particularly outdoor workers, women, children, and the elderly, are at a heightened risk. Addressing these concerns requires proactive governance, data driven risk assessments, and integrated approaches such as heat action plans. Our approach for this masterclass is to take you through national level policies and then dive into the subnational work through the case study of the Tamil Nadu heat mitigation strategy, which is supported by WRI-India, and city level heat action planning through the case study of the Thane heat action plan, being supported by the Council on Energy, Environment and Water. Now let me introduce our speakers. Our first speaker is Bhanu Khanna from WRI India. Bhanu is a program manager, geoanalytics. She works on research and projects related to climate resilience, environmental sustainability, transport and urban development. Her work focuses on policy advocacy and supporting government agencies with data-driven decision making. She's also played a significant role in the development of the TN heat mitigation strategy. As a next speaker from CEEW, we have Shravan Prabhu. Shravan is a program associate with the climate resilience team. His research focuses on quantifying physical climate risk associated with extreme weather events, particularly heat stress and rainfall variability across sectors, using an integrated analysis of climate, geospatial, and socioeconomic data. His work contributes to the development of subnational climate policies such as heat action plans and developing risk-informed decision-making tools. We are also honored to have Ms. Sudha Raman as our guest speaker for today. Ms. Raman is an officer in the Indian Forest Service, serving as the member secretary of the State Planning Commission in Tamil Nadu. Her role involves extensive work in evaluations and assessment, studies policy formulation and innovation and governance, particularly through the Tamil Nadu Innovative Initiatives projects, environmental sustainability, and community welfare initiatives. She has led efforts in sustainable land use planning, climate mitigation, and involved in leading the development of the Tamil Nadu heat mitigation strategy. Welcome to all our speakers. It's a pleasure to have you all here today. Before we begin, a few housekeeping notes. We will take questions after both the presentations are over. And please you add your question in the Q&A section during the session. Also, this session is being recorded for future reference. Now, moving on quickly to the presentation segment, given our time constraints, I'll invite Bhanu to begin her presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Shara. I'll share my screen. Hi, everyone. We'll be learning here about the heat action planning in India based on the subnational heat action plans and strategies that exist so far. To give you the context, how heat, what is the heat exposure as of now in the country, just between the 4 months in 2024 starting March to June, we had 14 out of 36 meteorological subdivisions experiencing more than 15 heat wave days. That's quite significant number, which means that 80%, and the map on the right shows that 80% of the population in just the first 15 days of April had more than 6 hours of heat stress exposure per day. It's a quite significant number, which also trickles down to the impact on the labor force productivity and overall India's economy. Coming to the current year, the map on the right actually shows the heat wave alerts and the other climate alerts, weather alerts that have come on for 17th of the March. And you can say a lot of states are reporting high temperatures, warm nights, etc. And this is just the beginning of the heat in some states and transition from winters for some states. What does this long-term exposure means? As of now, the heat action planning in India is based on the heat wave alerts that IMD releases. Those are based on either the departure from the normal air temperature or the air temperature exceeding 40 degrees and others for the respective geographies. Heat, as of now, is not part of the scheduled hazards as per the NDMA 2005 Act. And so far, in recent times, there are 9 states which have declared it as a local hazard, as a state-specific hazard. What does it mean that it's not a national scheduled hazard? It means that states cannot ask for the national support in terms of budgets for managing heats. States have to create the budgets either themselves or take a limited percentage of the state rescue budgets that are available. Now, this having it announced as a localized hazard does not only allow us to take the budgets, but it also allows us to have early warning systems specialized according to the localized thresholds. Currently, what are the mandates of heat action planning? So NDMA 2019 guidelines have laid out very clearly what heat action plans should contain and how the reporting for the heat action, heat wave management and heat action should be. They very specifically also ask SCPCCs to create a heat health action plan. As per the NCDC's National Action Plan on Heat-Related Illnesses, all the districts are supposed to collate the heat stroke cases, fatalities on daily basis, emergency attendance, and deaths. This kind of helps us to understand heat-related illnesses. India Cooling Action Plan also helps us to identify the synergies with the ongoing programs and missions at the national level and the state level to achieve thermal comfort of all. This is based basically on the building sciences. What are the guidelines of NDMA for designing a heat action plan? They suggest creating local heat-specific thresholds. They suggest that all-cause mortality, especially for the summer season, should be taken into consideration for defining localized thresholds. And they suggest for doing a local vulnerability assessment and risk assessment. However, all these are recommendations and not precise guidelines. When we deep dive into the gaps in the heat action planning, we learn that since it's only based on the heat wave alerts, many of the states have only do's and don'ts to be published during the heat waves. A lot of limited capacity in terms of understanding the heat health illnesses and reporting, because as of now, though the guidelines have come, there's very limited understanding of the subject. There's very limited focus on understanding the local vulnerabilities as well. And there's no clear guidelines or methodologies which are standardized among states that can help states to do these assessments in a standardized way. Also, there's lack of implementation, because the support that is needed for such large scale implementation with the funds, with the system optimization, interdepartmental coherence, etc., is still missing. Besides that, the guidelines do not specify anything in clear for heat action planning, implementation, updation, and monitoring, evaluation, and learning. Most of the heat action plans that we see as of now are either very urban or city focused. These are for cities as such, most of the plans. They have very limited understanding of the sectoral approach. For example, if a subject of energy needs to be discussed, then as a city or a state, what approach is to be followed? There's very limited focus on diversifying the biometeorological parameters. As I said, mostly the heat wave alerts are focused only on the air temperature, and there's very limited understanding of the biological and meteorological implications. Then lack of functional SOPs around any of these recommendations that these plans give. There's very limited focus on SOPs of operationalizing most of these recommendations. Coming to why and how did we start with the heat mitigation strategy in Tamil Nadu? We see that the Tamil Nadu, most of the city population, that is 27% of the state's population, is actually at the higher risk of heat stress because they also have urban heat island effects. The chances of air temperature increasing from 1.1 degrees to 3.1 degrees by the end of the centuries. The state of agriculture in the state is quite affected because the production, overall yield production, is affected by 30 to 35%. Recently, the regional meteorological center also released an advisory that some parts of the state can also have temperatures more than 38 degrees, and this is just a recent set of yesterday. Then there have been reports of heat-related fatalities. However, this number remains underreported because, as we discussed, there's limited understanding of the subject. Coming to the details of the heat mitigation strategy. So heat mitigation strategy was a long process which started in June 2023. We had sectoral committees formulated, and these committees were based on the disaster reduction, cooling solution, and health. Coming to how the WRI approached the entire TNHMS. So we created a heat mitigation, heat action network across 38 departments and sectoral experts. These experts and departments were consulted on regular basis through workshops, through in-department meetings, through in-person interviews, etc. And overall, the document you see has action areas identified for each sector at the state level and deep dives into identifying certain vulnerable areas. The entire heat mitigation strategy is basically a data bank for case studies, which shares to-dos, not to-dos, failures, and success stories from the neighboring states and international studies. We can see this is one screenshot from the workshop that we had. Going to the details of the report, there were three prime objectives of the report. The interdepartmental and intersectoral collaborative actions, identifying based on that the synergies and opportunities that exist with the policies and programs already in place, and then creating a data bank of all these learnings from the national and state level case studies. How did we approach this entire making of the document? Between the inception to the strategy formulation, we focused on including the scientific assessment of all the heat-related illnesses that were reported, all the departments that are working on it, how they've been working on it, what kind of actions do they take. So all that policy review was done. Plus, there was a geospatial assessment that was done to understand the existing exposure and also to understand what are the potential vulnerable groups. We analyzed most of these things based on the national level guidance and the thematics that are shared by NDMA, IMD, MOHCC, and the CHVA report, that is Climate Hazard Vulnerability Assessment Report by WRI. And based on this, we were finally able to identify the three action pathways for the heat mitigation strategy. These were divided into health and well-being, sustained resources and economic productivity, and cooling solutions. And all these actions were further bifurcated for three subsets. For example, natural systems and resources, so that we can understand which are the ecosystems and groups which are affected. Then looking towards the built environment, that is people and settlements which are at the risk, and vulnerable livelihoods and communities, to understand based on the current economies and their livelihoods and their financial socioeconomic development, what are the transitions that the, people would have to make. Coming to the parameters that we had studied to understand the geospatial implications of heat in the state, we took thermal stress, precipitation change, weather events, urban stress drought, urban pressures, resource degradation, and fire, within which air temperature, extreme events like heat waves, thermal comfort using the UTCI indicators, land surface temperature, were thoroughly analyzed. For example, the map on the right kind of shows that what are the maximum air temperatures in the summer months of the state. And we can see around 60% of the population is at exposure of more than 35 degrees Celsius temperature, which is not a very healthy temperature for human productivity and comfort. We see that between the months of March to June, where the heat is in extreme for the state, around 70% of the population experiences 8 to 9 hours of strong heat stress every day, which means most of the productive hours of the day are where people face the strong heat stress. We also see that most of these cities emerge as the center for the hotspots in the heat, given that they experience heightened urban heat island effects. After doing the geospatial assessment, we simultaneously proceeded with the review of the current policy programs in the state and the missions that are active through the national support. And we identified that there are 8 national level programs that are focusing on heat health synergies, and there are almost 19 ongoing programs in Tamil Nadu, which are heat allied. We also did a departmental mapping of these actions and synergies that we identified, that which departments can steer ahead the action for the heats. And the 5 prime departments that we identified were environment, climate change and forest, revenue disaster management, that is for the disaster management, housing and urban development, labor welfare skill development, and municipal administration. And these were the key departments that we identified further for the interventions. Going deep into the vulnerable groups that were identified, we basically classified everything into the 4 groups. We tried to understand which are the spaces based on the building and built fabric which are vulnerable, same ways which are the infrastructure networks which are critical and vulnerable, populations which are working in the adverse working conditions, livelihoods which are dependent on the climate sensitive activities, especially the heat related sensitivities, and office goers, work technicians, etc., who might have high long-term exposure to extreme heat. Then forests and mangroves, agriculture and animal husbandry, to understand the impact of heat on these sectors, which is often not covered in the heat action plans as they are very urban centric. Vulnerable communities which are disproportionately impacted given their underlying socioeconomic and demographic conditions. Other marginal groups like women, elderly, children, people with comorbidities, etc. Critical infrastructure and services like water supply, energy supply, etc., which may be missing to certain settlements and communities or might have paucity. So all these groups were categorized, and ultimately we had 55 plus such groups identified for which certain recommendations were given. We
Hi,
covered the
Bhanu.
sectors.
Sorry to
Yeah,
interrupt.
it's almost the end. Yeah. We covered these sectors, as you can see, and these are the recommendations that were given, and these were all broad level strategies for which further these departments that we discussed were suggested on creating either the functional guidelines or research or policy plan documents. The one of the outputs after TNHMS that we achieved was that state did declare it as a state specific hazard, and state also has a framework for the NbS solutions, which actually helps operationalize the document. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bhanu, for rushing through this. Actually, Sudha ma'am has to get on to a meeting. So I would like to invite Sudha ma'am to share on what were the next steps being taken up by the state of Tamil Nadu to operationalize the heat mitigation strategy. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you, Bhanu, for a detailed presentation. I think you made my job more easy. So, taking, to follow up from where Bhanu had left, we submitted this document to the state government in the month of March last year. And subsequently, the state government went about declaring heat as a state-specific disaster. I think today Tamil Nadu stands as the first state in doing that. And the importance of declaring it as a state-specific disaster comes not just with only the paperwork or the asset notification. It also gives us a huge potential of accessing the reserve fund that's been earmarked for disaster. So this also comes with one notification that people who are victimized, who are deceased due to heat, will be able to get an ex gratia of 4 lakhs. And we do not want, actually anyone to be victimized. And subsequently, what we went about doing is to build out a heat mitigation action plan also. And now the SDMA is also working on heat action plan at the seven, at least for the seven smart cities. CEEW is doing the work. I believe Mr. Shravan will be able to talk about that work and also to tell about how these heat action plans are going to be like getting implemented at the city level in these smart cities. And what we also went about doing is not just to stop with the mitigation strategy and also to show where the heat island, the hotspots of the urban heat islands are. We work with UNEP and CEPT University in identifying the urban heat island, the hotspots of the urban heat island in the 11 smart cities of Tamil Nadu. And this data is also available. And that really gives the opportunity for the administrators in these cities to localize heat action plan and to ensure that the heat mitigation or to declare cool zones in these areas might be possible. And now we are working with UNEP in building a passive cooling strategy at the city level, how passive cooling could be mainstreamed also to support the heat mitigation works. And we're also doing one other work with few more institutions on developing a framework for NbS for the tier 2 cities. Maybe I'll talk about that a little later. And one other work, what we are doing is also to map the existing blue-green infrastructure that also has the opportunity to act as an agent that could be helping the heat mitigation. So this is in the nutshell the works that's being done subsequent to releasing the heat mitigation strategy. Yeah.
So thank you, ma'am, for sharing that. Wanted to also understand about the nature-based solutions framework that you were sharing, and what do you think is the role of this framework in reducing the urban heat effects, and how is it is then being implemented in cities?
Uh, yeah, I think nature-based solutions are something not Greek or Latin to us. It's something that's been a part and parcel of our traditional knowledge and traditional infrastructures also. And but then looking at the lens of how the nature-based solutions are more sustainable, are more eco-friendly, and more supportive to ensure climate action is what is being reiterated when we are mainstreaming NBS into the climate action. I think in that way, nature-based solutions like it could be a green belt or it could be a wetland in the locality or developing, small parks in around the industrial areas or in the human habitations can be of a huge benefit. And all of it, I think it's already got documented and there is a lot of integration. All that we are looking here is how this nature-based solution could be integrated into a city development and also into how the climate action can be initiated in by means of enhancing and identifying and declaring these areas as the existing nature-based solution readily available in our neighborhood. And the framework what we are developing right now for the tier 2 cities are definitely going to be helping these tier 2 cities. And having known for the information of the people who have joined here online, I would like to tell that Tamil Nadu is one state that is almost 52% urbanized. The population living in the urban areas is continuing to increase a lot and lot and lot. And also industrialization is also happening in a rapid manner. Having said that, it also gives us a high time that we also initiate the sustainability part of it, and we are working strongly for that. We also have worked and built on the GHG inventory to become net zero economy very soon. And having said all that, mainstreaming nature-based solution is definitely something which is possible for us to initiate climate action. And lots of work. That is also a lot of flagship missions that is being institutionalized by the government of Tamil Nadu. One of the flagship mission is Green Tamil Nadu mission, which focuses on increasing the green cover of the state to 33% by 2030. And a lot of action is being initiated, and lots of planting activity and maintaining the existing green cover is also one of the objective here. And one of the flagship program is on the wetland mission. And Tamil Nadu is really doing well in terms of wetlands. We have been increasing the mangrove area, and Tamil Nadu is one state that has got a very high number of Ramsar sites. Wetlands being declared as Ramsar site. We have got 20 Ramsar sites as of now. And this is a huge number out of 80 odd numbers in the country. Tamil Nadu has nearly 1/4 of it. And and declaring, we are continuing to declare a lot of bird sanctuaries. That also means that the wetlands are also getting recognized as protected areas. That gives them more of an opportunity to conserve this area. So that is the way in which the existing natural the advantages or the NbS is getting recognized and also protected. And that's some measures what the state has been doing.
Sure, ma'am. Thank you so much for answering that. We have a question from our audience. Given that Tamil Nadu has announced heat as a state-specific disaster, they wanted to understand how are heat-related deaths now being defined and assessed for the respective families to gain access to financial assistance.
Yeah, I'm thankful to the person who has raised this question. I somehow missed to talk about it. When we worked on the heat mitigation strategy, that was one recommendation that we had given to the public health department to ensure that heat-related health data should be maintained separately. And the department has come forward and they have established One Health lab has been established now. This One Health is being promoted in a stronger manner. And recently, the Directorate of Public Health has given an advisory to all the hospitals, that includes both the government and private hospital, to conduct detailed investigations on the deaths that are being reported, and to examine and to ascertain if that death is caused because of heat. And this particular initiative by the DPH is being received so well, and the hospitals are given, and I think the Department of Public Health is working on an SOP also in getting this, streamlined. And now we are having a system that is ascertaining if there is going to be any death that's going to be reported, to ensure that if it's caused because of heat. And people who are being declared as a victim would definitely be eligible for the ex gratia, and the government is strongly working towards that.
That is really good to hear, ma'am. I think given the time constraints, I'll like to close the questions for you today. And thank you, ma'am, again for sharing your experience and also taking the time out to join us despite your busy schedule. We strongly believe the initiatives being taken up by Tamil Nadu surely serve as good case examples for other states to work on heat-focused policies and NbS frameworks. Thank you, ma'am, for joining us today.
Thanks for joining with you all. Thank you.
Now over to Shravan from CEEW to walk us through city level heat action planning and risk assessment efforts. Shravan, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Shaurya. Thanks, Bhanu, for your presentation, and also Sudha, ma'am, for the insights into how Tamil Nadu is pretty much leading the work on heat action planning. So I will talk more about what goes into designing a city level heat action plan. I think right now we saw more about the state level subnational policies, but at the city level, what goes into designing of the plan, and what are the implementation steps based on the Thane City Heat Action Plan, which we supported Thane Municipal Corporation last year. I hope my screen is visible, Shaurya.
Yes, your screen is visible.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
So yeah, before diving into the presentation, I'll quickly introduce Council on Energy, Environment and Water (CEEW). We are a not-for-profit policy research think tank based out of New Delhi. We are a 330 plus multidisciplinary team who work across multiple research areas like low carbon economy, clean air, sustainable water, and I'm part of the climate resilience team. And we are engaged in more than 20 Indian states right now, where we are supporting multiple states and multiple cities in developing their heat action plans. Yes. So to talk about cities, why cities are a focus of heat action plan, I think we have all heard about the term urban heat islands, urban heat island effect, where the cities record more, like a little bit more higher temperature than the surrounding rural areas. There was a study which came out earlier this year which said that Indian cities are warming twice the rate compared to rest of the country, and the trend was more significant in tier 2 cities. Uh, Last year, I think we have seen one of the most longest heat wave in India's history, where nearly 37 cities in North India faced temperature of above 45 degrees Celsius. When I talk about cities like Delhi, there was also dual burden of heat wave and air pollution episodes occurring together. While we say that more than 40 to 50% of Indian population is expected to live in cities by 2036, and yet most of our urban infrastructure is yet to be built, which gives us also an opportunity to tap into the potential for how we can build our cities in a heat resilience manner. So why is a heat action plan necessary at city level? I think Bhanu talked about the guidelines from NDMA, which came out in first in 2016, and then they were revised a couple of times in 2017 and 2019. And the whole idea of why do we even need a heat action plan, right? Because generally districts have district disaster management plans, states have SDMPs, state disaster management plan. But the whole idea of a heat action plan started because when heat was emerging as a disaster, it's generally called an invisible disaster. So then whose responsibility is heat? Is it the responsibility of health ministry or health departments? Is it the responsibility of disaster management or environment? So for that reason, a heat action plan as a policy document was proposed to basically kind of bring everyone on one platform and with some goals and identify, and then take some appropriate action through coordination mechanisms. So at a city level, of course, the main objective of a heat action plan is to ensure that nobody dies from an extreme heat event and to reduce the overall heat-related illnesses that occur in a city. For that, you need to identify where my risk population is, and then only I can take some targeted action, because heat wave, as we know, the financial resources for heat are pretty scarce compared to other disasters, primarily because uh, heat is not a nationally notified disaster in the state disaster response fund. But just earlier this year, the Ministry of Home Affairs have made heat waves eligible for funding under the state disaster mitigation fund. So these are the two different funds under the overall disaster management funding, but the response fund contributes around 80% of the funding. But the 20% funding is now available for both heatwave and lightning as per the MHA notification. So that is why even when any intervention is planned in the mitigation fund, the first step is to identify what is the risk and where is the risk. Without that, you cannot take any targeted action. Like heat is, you cannot see heat. When heat comes, we do not feel the hard impact. The buildings do not fall. There is no flooding. So the only way to quantify heat stress or quantify extreme heat is through data and is through assessment. And the third is to, of course, integrate heat resilience into long-term urban planning. And for smart cities, there are already multiple projects ongoing. There are already multiple programs and schemes that happen at city level. How can we integrate heat resilience measures into this? So I'll start with a case study of Thane city. We were supposed to have Ms. Manisha Pradhan, who is the Chief Environment Officer and the member secretary of the Heatwave Task Force Committee, but unfortunately she cannot be with us due to some medical emergency. So I will take the liberty of extending the presentation by a few minutes to go through the details of the Thane City Heat Action Plan, which was done last year. So it started with looking at the projections of extreme hot days and extreme warm nights. So if you can see on the left side, it represents by 2050 how many yearly, how many total how many extreme hot days will occur. So if we can see 150 hot days in a decade, which means around 15 extreme hot days per year. But if you look at the right side plot, if you look at the extreme warm nights, we'll see that it's almost 234 in a decade, which is almost 24 extreme warm nights in a year, in a summer in Maharashtra as a whole. Now, when we generally think about heat wave, the first image that comes to your mind is an outdoor worker working under the sun, which is directly related to daytime temperature. But we fail to acknowledge the impact of extremely warm nights, which is even more hazardous because it does not let our bodies to cool down from the daytime heat. And building upon this, the Thane City Heat Action Plan was launched last year by the Honorable CM of Maharashtra, Shri Eknath Shinde. And the mission was to ensure that no lives are lost, but also to inculcate that planning for extreme heat in the way that the whole city planning and urban planning works. This was developed based on the 8-step checklist of NDMA guidelines. A simple framework was developed. So, for example, when to take action, where to take action, and who will and how to take action. This is important because last I just mentioned that heat is not visible, and only through data can we actually measure heat. So when to take action becomes very critical. Okay, if I'm a city administrator, at what temperature do I even start doing some actions? Like at what temperature do I, shut down my schools, or I change the timings? At what is that temperature and what is that humidity threshold? That becomes very crucial, because if I take a very low threshold, if I shut down my schools very early, the heat is less. It leads to economic losses. If I'm too late, then the heat impacts will be very high, and there will be deaths and there will be heat-related illnesses. So defining a proper heat threshold at a city level is very crucial. Second, of course, where is my risk? Risk is not only temperature or urban heat island or humidity. It is how those factors impact the human population. How does it impact the demographics? How does it impact the vulnerable groups, like people, population below 6, population above 60, population is already existing chronic health conditions, outdoor workers. And the third is, okay, if I am from a particular department in a city, I have a lot of work that I need to do on a day-to-day basis anyway. Now this heat is an added burden on my shoulders. So how can we streamline the process to make sure that everybody knows their responsibilities, everybody is aware of that, and how do we ensure the coordination between different agencies and departments in a city? So I'll start with firstly when to take action and how are generally heat thresholds defined. So IMD has a criteria for defining a heat wave, which the thresholds are more at a regional level. Like the thresholds are broader scale, like 40 degrees for plains, 37 for coast, and 30 for hills. And beyond that, departure from normal, like a long-term average temperature, is calculated. But at the same time, the WMO and WHO guidelines on heat and health early warning system is essentially to look at, okay, for a coastal city like Thane, the temperature threshold for heat wave might be 37. But it might also be that in the past, at 35 degrees Celsius, I have seen an outbreak of heat-related illnesses and heat-related deaths, right? So how do I ensure that the health sector and the health community is prepared for such outbreaks? And this is something called as a heat and health early warning systems, which takes two inputs. One is the input from your temperature data or thermal variables, as they called, which is your Tmax, Tmean, or there is also wet bulb group temperature, heat index. These are widely used global indices, but they are not really calibrated for India. Heat index is something that we use for Thane city, but it is not calibrated for the other drier parts like the northwestern India and other such areas. And then we correlate that with all-cause mortality count data, cause-specific daily mortality data, hospital admissions, emergency ambulance services. But again, as we know, this data set is a huge challenge in Indian cities when we want to get a long-term data. The National Program on Climate Change and Human Health has come out with guidelines and dashboards for recording of this health variable data sets. And sooner, I'm hoping that in a couple of years, we will have this data set as well, which will help us establish this threshold. So Thane is a coastal city, and the impact of humidity is very high. So for that reason, we use the heat index, the NOAA heat index, to define the felt heat threshold for the city. So it basically tells you if the temperature is 30 and relative humidity is 70, then it feels like temperature is 35. This is just an example. I think many of us have also seen this on Google and on our phone when we get like feels like. So these are generally the indices that are used. And this is important because after 37 degrees Celsius, when human body exceeds 37 degrees Celsius or 100 Fahrenheit, which is generally we say we have fever, we start to cool off by sweating. Like the human body starts cooling off by sweating, and when there is high humidity, this sweating does not happen, and this is something that leads to high heat stress. So in coastal cities, understanding the impact of humidity on extreme heat is very critical. So looking at the long-term data, hourly long-term data of last 40 years, we identified the yellow, orange, and red as a threshold for each month over Thane city. And as you can see from the table, For example, if I look at the month of May, if I see that in my dry heat threshold, the red alert is 41. When I add humidity to it, it becomes 46, which means Thane has historically seen felt heat of around 46 degrees Celsius. Even last year, the felt heat temperature over there went up to 50 degrees Celsius. And IMD, although does not acknowledge humidity in the official criteria, but the forecast bulletins which are provided by IMD does have heat index based forecast as well. And since last year, they are also giving this percentile based forecast, which the cities need to use to understand what is my personal city level forecast like. Because using a percentile or a region specific or a city specific thresholds also accounts for acclimatization, right? So how I feel, how a person is living in Pune versus how a person living in Thane all their life or a person living in Jaipur all their life faces heat is very different, and it mostly is based on acclimatization. We also integrated long-term projections, which were procured from the Indian Institute of Tropical Meteorology. And the reason for this is because Thane is not a city that has traditionally seen, a lot of heat-related deaths or heat-related illnesses. Heat is a very new kind of disaster which is occurring in the city. So we also wanted to look at, okay, what will happen down the line in say 30, 40 years or 20 years. And again, we found that the warm nights will be much higher than hotter days. And we need to plan for it now. We need to change the way in which we are planning our city now. So this exercise was pretty helpful for that. And based on this threshold, kind of a mechanism was established, which is a common mechanism across all the cities. Because without a heat action plan in city, what happens is that the forecast, which is received from IMD's Regional Meteorological Center, that will go to the district officer. It does not come to cities as of yet. So when a city establishes a heat action plan, it is one of the most crucial component of that is to develop that mechanism of how a district will coordinate with city, because these are the two different governance units. The governance structure is different. At city level you have municipal commissioner, who is the who is the head of the city. At a district level you have district collector. So a city level heat action plan was useful in this regard to align the forecast dissemination platform. Coming to the second component, and on the most crucial component, which is lacking in almost 95% of heat action plans, as per research done by CPR last year. So we use the land surface temperature mapping and the land use land cover mapping to identify urban heat island hotspots. And as you can see from this map, we are very clearly able to identify areas where the land surface temperature was highest, and they are the pretty densely built up areas with very little green cover. So this exercise helped in identifying at a 30-meter spatial resolution where are the urban heat island hotspot emerging. But again, heat risk is not just temperature or humidity or UHI or warm nights. It's basically how those parameters of meteorology interact with physical factors like population density, your housing architecture, like slum households are more vulnerable. Socioeconomic factors, if you already have comorbidities, whether you have access to water, whether you're working indoor or working outdoor, age and gender, affordability of cooling solutions, and then of course institutional factors like power demand management, water supply, which are fairly difficult to quantify based on data, but this interaction of all of this is what leads to heat risk. So how did we do this at a ward level? So we used the IPCC framework of risk, which defines risk as a function of hazard, exposure, and vulnerability. For hazard, we considered 5 indicators, which was increase in frequency of very hot days, very warm nights, heat index, rainy days, and hotspots of land surface temperature. For exposure, we took population density, the building density, which was mostly calculated from geospatial data. And the vulnerability data set is particularly where the ULBs play a very crucial role, because ULBs have this data at ward level. It's just about tapping into that data and using that data in a proper format to generate this kind of insight. So we took like total slum population in each ward. What is the young population? What is the old population? How much population is with chronic health conditions? Access to how many health centers are there per 1,000 population. We mapped the green cover in each ward. We mapped the automatic weather stations, like how many automatic weather stations are there in each ward, because that's an adaptive capacity indicator, right? If we have more dense network of observation stations, we know the micro level temperature variations and other such parameters. And when we finally put this into the risk equation, we identified at a ward level that Waghale and Mumbai are the two wards with the highest risk. And interestingly, last year after the plan was launched, it was noted that around 70 to 80% of total heat-related illnesses were recorded from these two wards. So that helped the municipal corporation to take proactive measures to at least prevent those heat-related illnesses from translating into heat-related deaths. And based on the same analysis in each ward, we are also able to identify, okay, what is that factor which is leading to that risk, based on which a certain recommendations are provided. And now, lastly, coming to who will and how to take action. So this is how a matrix looks like in a plan, which identifies, okay, you have a theme, you have a task, in responsibility, which division is going to do this, what is the secondary support needed from district, and what is the secondary support needed from state. So this kind of streamlines the responsibility and streamlines the mechanism across different departments and authorities. Thane City also formed a heatwave task force committee based on the recommendation, which was chaired by the additional commissioner. And the main objective was this, to ensure interdepartmental coordination, because Thane is a pretty big city. The municipality is very big. So the municipal committee almost met every 2 weeks, and when there was a red alert, the meetings were much more frequent to take a stock of, okay, what is happening, where is the risk, what is the forecast looking like, and what actions can be taken. And this is a very crucial step of a heat action plan implementation. This is just a framework of monitoring, evaluation, learning, because heat action plans are supposed to be an iterative process. That is, it should be at least updated every once in 2 years based on the learnings of the past. Okay, what went well, what did not go well. You have new data, so it needs to be updated. So it is an iterative process. And IEC, of course, this IECs are available made available by the National Program of Climate Change and Human Health. There's also some IEC in local language. So Thane City also did some campaigns based on this in the high risk wards. And this is some follow-ups, implementation parts of the plan, where there was a capacity building module with the health authorities to identify heat-related illnesses in the population. I'll just quickly wrap up the presentation. So after the heat action plan was implemented, what was done is, through collaboration with the health department and through ASHA workers, in the two high-risk wards, a household survey was conducted using this framework of 5x5 metrics based on climate and disaster resilience index to identify, okay, at a household level, what is the risk? Because in Thane, the system is that there is an urban healthcare center, and a particular urban healthcare center corresponds to a certain number of houses. So there are 33 UHCs, and then there are certain households which are covered by that UHC. So the idea was that, okay, each UHC should be empowered to understand, okay, what are the risks in households which I'm catering to, and then what actions can be taken. So these are just some insights which emerged. Majority of the population, as you can see, found that the high daytime temperature was contributing more to the heat stress. Some found that relative humidity plus high temperature. Some also found the importance of high nighttime temperature. Then it was, okay, what is the occupation of a family member, to identify if someone is working outdoors, indoors, what is the type of houses. This was very important to identify where are those slum pockets developing. And then we also asked some questions which were more, which would allow us more hyperlocal data. Is how many windows do you have? What are the ways in which you use to keep your house cool? Like, do you use AC, cooler, fan and AC, fan and cooler? So this was some insights which emerged at each UHC level. And then finally, we also asked the people themselves at household level, what are the solutions that you feel should be taken up for reducing the impact of heat wave? And majority of the responses said that the green cover needs to be expanded, followed by providing drinking water at junctions. So creating cooling shelters was the third option that ranked. So I think this gave us a lot of insights also on what the population at a city level expects from a heat action plan, or what are the solutions that people want to see. So taking this work forward, as you know, there are gaps in heat action plans, which I've already highlighted. 97% of India's HAPs lack heat risk and vulnerability assessment. And what we estimate is that if each city has to develop their heat action plan, because the capacity of ULBs to themselves do this UHI analysis, risk analysis is very little. And generally the way in which cities operate is that they will hire some consultant to do that And based on our estimations, it will take around 720 crores for if all the 4,500 plus cities in India want to develop a heat action plan. And for that, we are trying to leverage some technological innovation to automate the development of heat action plan, which is based on like some data is coming from cities. Most of the open access data which is provided by IMD, the UHI mapping is already there. And at a ward level, how can we quantify the risk using this technological innovation? And CEEW is working with around 5 to 6 states currently in developing similar hyperlocal heat action plans, and then also in collaborating with our partners like WRI and other think tanks and not-for-profits in the space to look at, okay, one thing is designing heat action plan, but then how do we take it forward to the last mile implementation? And with that, I think I will just wrap up my presentation. So this is a snapshot of another heat action plan, because this presentation was also supposed to be on nature-based solutions. So we are working in Panji city, which is a smart city, where we are looking at a very ward level planning of how and exactly at which street and at which ward what kind of solutions could be taken up. Because I think this is very important, because one learning for us from here was that generally we propose say cool roofs or green roofs, but in Panji it's all Mangalorean tiles, where green roofs do not essentially work. So we had to look for some other solutions and other indigenous solutions like coconut leaves and other such things. So I think looking at the ground perspectives also is very important when planning for heat action. And with that, I will just wrap up my PPT. I hope that I am on time.
Yes, you are on time, Shravan. Thank you so much for this insightful and detailed presentation. Strongly believe the case studies of Tamil Nadu and Thane both provide valuable lessons for cities across India. So let me also now take up some questions from the audience. We have a lot of questions here. The first one would be Shruti asks that what are the differential vulnerability to heat stress risks based on youth women, and if this has influenced the way payouts are calculated during heat wave events? Would you like to answer that?
Thanks, Shaurya. It's a pertinent question because as of now, as Shravan also mentioned, a lot of the cities don't have the capacities to measure precisely at the recurring rate that what are the prevalent heat, the temperatures, humidity, etc. And most of the cities, in fact, don't declare heat waves or events or risk advisories based on combination of multiple of these indices. Recently, there has been inclusion of surge pricing, insurance, or sort of compensation for the leaves during the heat waves, etc., which was done. Zomato has done this, and this was given to the gig workers based on their attendance during the heat wave hours, etc. And if they are unable to work, or the heat wave advisory shares that they are not supposed to work, then how the compensations would be given. But what happens is a lot of these cities lack very localized information, right? So a lot of these assessments for which the insurance or the thresholding for the compensation would be done would be at the regional level temperatures. These may be the model data sets or projected data sets, etc. And these are not very localized thresholds. So at times, the temperatures that are provided for the threshold do not meet the actual conditions. And this has been the case several times. Like I know Jodhpur has been one case where MHD is involved and they've tried to do that. So the compensation, I mean, every time whenever the compensation needs to be given, so all of this assessment needs to be reworked on to understand if it genuinely crosses thresholds or not. And it's a very complex process as of now. We have tried to do these kind of develop these kind of mechanisms at a very localized city level. However, there are no standardized process so far. So in terms of the insurance claims, etc., there is no standard process so far. Each bank or institution will have their own standards and processes, and therefore there is a need to create operational mechanism around how such localized thresholds can be included in providing suitable compensation and at what level.
Shravan, thank you for answering that. We have another question related to the tea and heat strategy. So, how are the issues and challenges in rural areas been addressed in the tea and heat strategy, and whether the same strategies can be applied for both rural and urban areas?
So TN heat mitigation strategy very clearly defines that there are sectors which are overlapping between urban and rural, and there are sectors which are independent of urban and rural, and there are sectors which indirectly impact each of the geographies. But there is no way that at the state level the heat mitigation can bifurcate in the recommendations for rural and urban setup. It does identify the departments. However, a lot of these recommendations you will see, for example, there's a strategy formulation that is advised for livestock shed management. uh, for example, what kind of paints to be done, what kind of mist fans, what kind of arrangements with the gunny bag in terms of the costing, etc., should be managed. And this comes as a case study bank. And these are all the recommendations and suggestions which were assimilated from those workshops and meetings that we had across the government departments, expert groups, etc., or our case studies through the desk-based research, or our operational works in different regions in the country. So you'll see a lot of those are very focused on the rural setups, but it doesn't stop us to include the same recommendation in the urban setup. So these recommendations are very context specific in terms of who is impacted, but not in the sense if it's rural or urban in specific. So a lot of these can be scaled, but it has to be very context specific. Again, coming back to the same that who is impacted and when it is the most impacted.
Sure. Um, Also, another question that we have is that should India consider establishing a heat risk index similar to the air quality index to focus on improving public awareness and policy making?
So heat index as such, NDMA guidelines, 2019 guidelines actually do suggest the states and cities to take into consideration the localized thresholds, which are informed by the heat risk-based indices, because it recommends them to include the vulnerability and risk assessments. However, as I had mentioned in the presentation also, and in one of the question responses, there is a data paucity to understand at the very localized level that what are the heat numbers that we are actually getting. Therefore, creating a heat index, a standardized heat index across the country may not work, because a lot of the impacts of heat also depends on the microclimatic conditions. For example, what is the build form, what is the nature of vegetation do I have, what is the wind speed, etc., and which may vary highly between the time of the day, between the months, between the seasons, and the nature of these climatic projections also that we have is very is so though has a consensus that the heat is going to increase, but still has a lot of uncertainties in terms of the peaks that we might see per day, right? So this is going to be very difficult task if we start creating a heat index as a standard process across the country, as a number across the country. However, there should be, and this is what I had highlighted also, that there is a gap in creating a standard methodology for cities and geographies to undertake any of these localized assessments, which can actually help them um, bridge the gap between operationalizing any of the recommendations that exist.
Sure.
Yeah, just
Shravan, would you like to add this?
Yeah, just to add to that, Bhanu, I think in addition to that, IMD is developing an India-specific heat index for forecasting. So it considers multiple factors like temperature, wind, relative humidity, and also solar radiation and other such aspects. But I think currently it is being used internally to validate by IMD, and soon is expected to come out in public in a couple of years. Having said that, I think heat index as such, there are heat indexes which are global in nature, like Van der Group temperature heat index, but they are not really calibrated for India. So IMD is trying to build that. But yeah, I think.
Yeah, precisely. I mean, IMD is trying to do that, but in the sense heat. So they are also building a heat index based on the meteorological and climatic conditions. But this heat risk informed decision making, right, which is very contextual to the local conditions, demography, socioeconomic, built form, etc. So at the national level, we may not be able to create a national level heat risk index. Therefore, when it comes to risk and vulnerabilities, it should come from a very localized understanding. Though IMD and NDMA can help in supporting creating the bioclimatic indices, which should be used by the geographies to undertake the heat risk index calculations.
Sure. Thank you again both for answering that. Specific to Shravan, I think we have a question. What specific actions did Thane City take in addressing heat issues in those two identified wards? Would you like to share that?
Yeah, I think one thing I forgot to mention in my presentation was that just few days back, Thane City's official budget for this financial year has come out, and 1 CR has been allocated specially for implementation of heat action plan, which I think is one of the first times in the country that a city has officially allocated budget in the official city budget. And there are 5 to 6 interventions being planned by the city. One is, of course, cooling shelters to be developed in these wards. The other one is green roofing on certain government buildings. Then there are also some aspects of basic like cool roofs, and the Thane city is also building an integrated command center for real-time decision making. So these are 4 or 5 solutions that the city will start with, but I mean, of course, this is an incremental process because in India also the heat action is very recent, and we also need to demonstrate through pilot basis. Okay, if this solution really works, because a cooling shelter has been piloted in Jodhpur, but not in coastal areas yet. So we do not really know what kind of cooling technologies do we need, in a cooling shelter that is being done in a humid heat condition. So there are a few 4 or 5 solutions, like I mentioned, which are being undertaken by Thane, starting with the wards, but then expanding to other cities eventually over the years.
Sure. We also have another question that talks about how are the varied temperatures within the city, say the outskirts, the core and mid region, measure a map given that the IMD stations are usually situated near the airports.
Yeah. So maybe I can start, and then Bhanu, please feel free to join.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think IMD stations is okay, but what we generally use is satellite data. So there are 2 things. One is air temperature, and other is the land surface temperature. Land surface temperature can be mapped based on satellite data sets, but for air temperature, IMD station data is there, but it's not available in public domain. What is available is gridded data at a 100-kilometer resolution. But there are other products, like the one we used was called IMDA reanalysis data, which is developed very recently as part of the National Monsoon Mission and made available by IMD and the National Center for Medium Range Forecasting. And it provides 12 by 12 gridded hourly data of last 40-50 years. So in bigger cities, I mean, it's a very suitable data set because one grid covers at least 2 or 3 wards. But there is a challenge of micro level data, air temperature data, land surface temperature data can be derived from satellites, but that is a real challenge that we need to really solve for.
Sure. Also, we have another question that states what considerations are there for indoor heat when assessing the heat stress? Shravan, do you want to take it up as well?
So we haven't really worked on indoor heat per se, but maybe Bhanu, if you want to take it, any comments on this?
So in indoor, I mean, this is a very building sciences specific question, and there are some indices which already take into consideration the indoor comfort. For example, the most of the heat index calculations and the this universal thermal comfort indices, they take into consideration that uh, the basic assumption is that it that it's a shaded component for which these indices are calculated, and it's though it may differ between the actual indoor versus the shaded, However, this is one model data set which is available globally and is more of a standardized approach and does take into consideration the radiation, the wind speeds, the clothing, the bioclimatic indices such as metabolic heat, etc. However, a lot of BMI sizes do take into consideration the fenestration size, the fenestration orientation, the building orientation in terms of the seasonality, whatever the shadow analysis and the building SIO. Along with this, there are many indicators such as the cross ventilation speed and in terms of the activities which are happening in the built fabric. For example, the kitchen size, the washroom size, etc., and how ventilated they are. And then also there are other things like the fenestration material, the building material, the roofing material, how raised it is from the ground height. So there are several scientific parameters which are actually included. So there can be an extensive list. But when we look at creating city level heat action plans, this kind of micro detail may not be available. Therefore, there's a lot of work, which also is one of the recommendations in the Tamil Nadu heat mitigation strategy, to create codes that are suitable, to create building codes that are suitable for passive cooling as well as artificial cooling, along with standardizing the thermal comfort based on different building types and forms. And this can be this also calls for a very localized study using certain prototypes that are built, and then we analyze what are the changes and impacts and effects that are of the construction, during construction, of construction, and during the utility of those building prototypes.
Thank you, Bhanu, for answering that. This next question is for Shravan. How long did it take you for you to assess the indices for the ward-wise analysis?
Yeah, so I think we started working with Thane City somewhere around December 2023, and the plan was launched in March 2024. So around maybe 2 to 3 months. There was a lot of hand-holding involved in this process, because what happens is that the cities do have that ward level data, but they do not really know where the data is. So we had to actually sit with them, identify, okay, on their computers, where is the data stored, and other stuff. So around 2 to 3 months is what it took. The major challenge is not in the open access data, the land surface temperature data, the IMD data, or any other such data set. The challenge is in getting data from the cities. And we are also trying to automate this process of how the data can be procured from the cities and how the open access data can be integrated. And we have been able to bring down that time to around 2 weeks once the data is received from the cities to generate the entire heat action plan.
Thanks again. Also, another question for both of you would be that has the impact of nature-based solutions been assessed in these heat action plans? And like, for example, up to what radius does a green infrastructure intervention is influential?
So, because the heat action plans that WRI has so far worked on are at state level or regional level, or otherwise they've been part of the climate action planning assessments and climate hazard vulnerability assessments that WRI has conducted, there has been an extensive study done on how what is the influence of greens and blue spaces on the localized surface temperatures. But this does call for a extensive analysis on overall microclimate understanding as well. We are doing currently some of the studies, and these are going to be a few knowledge products out soon, where we are trying to understand the different nature of lakes, public parks, and open spaces, and how are they influencing the land surface temperature. For example, one of the observations I'd share, for those of you who know Bengaluru and Cubbon Park, the influence that Cubbon Park has in its vicinity in terms of dampening the heat island effects by lowering the surface temperatures versus any other park which is a neighborhood level and limited tree plantation with more of grass and paved surfaces for the neighborhood folks to walk and use it as a recreation space will be very different, right? And similarly for the water bodies, which are, as Sudha ma'am was explaining, like Ramsar sites or wetlands or these nature reserves or bird sanctuaries, etc., where the original landform and the land cover is almost untouched, will be very different from a open space like a zoo, which may have tree-lined avenues, might reduce surface temperature to a certain extent, but overall their microclimatic benefits will be very limited. So these kind of studies we are trying to do, and but it may vary again city to city. That what kind of thresholds we get may vary city to city. Hence, the understanding of this needs to be done at various agroclimatic zones between the various scales and sizes of these green and blue spaces to derive precisely what kind of nature-based solution works in what zone.
Shravan, do
I
you want
think
to add?
globally,
Yeah.
so, globally also there have been few studies which have tried to do impact evaluation of some of these things. So what I understand is that the greening of a surface can reduce the temperature by 2 to 3 degrees based on that surface temperature. But green roofing on say buildings, there are some examples where the temperatures have reduced during the peak heat wave season almost by say 10 to 15 degrees Celsius. It depends on the type of green roofing and the types of plants and other stuff. There are some low-cost solutions like cool roofs and other such things which are known to reduce the temperatures by say 2 to 3 degrees only, but they are low cost. So I think these case studies as such exist based on wherever the pilots have happened, but we have not really looked at as of yet on some of these solutions because most of them are also long term and it will take us some time to get there, first to implement and then to do the impact evaluation, like Bhanu was also mentioning.
It's also
Um,
important that a lot of these NbS interventions that we suggest, right? I mean, and this is a prospective research study area for everyone here who's interested in the domain to understand what are the financial implications of these interventions. And apart from the financial implications, what are the other socio-demographic factors that can actually influence a lot of these strategies? Because a lot of things that we are studying as of now, as Shravan also rightly pointed, we are doing these studies based on the existing land features of the cities, and we are not very sure how certain interventions, a brick mortar intervention like a wetland park or something, might have implications in terms of the microclimate and overall how human animal interactions happen, etc. So there could be many um, factors which can influence the livabilities in the area along with the financial discourse of these interventions. So this is a domain which should thoroughly be studied.
Thank you again. I think I'll just take up the last question. This was actually asked in the very beginning. I missed it. For urban heat, how have the heat action plans informed the city development plans, specifically in terms of land use planning and DCR framing?
Yeah, I think that's a long way to go for that. I'm not aware of any city heat action plan or any other climate resilience activity which has informed any city level development plan. Because I think most of the action on heat that is happening in India is mostly incremental or a very response focused as of it. We are yet to see any transformational changes that can come up, but that is a part of the process. I think we are seeing a new disaster over the last few years, and it will take us some time to integrate not only heat but other broader climate resilience actions into the overall city development plans.
Sure. Bhanu, would you like to add?
So it's a persistent gap, as Shravan also highlighted, as we just discussed, right? Up till, in fact, 2019, there was hardly any discussion on heat action plans. And now in the last few years, those heat action, I mean, apart from just the do's and don'ts in these heat action plans, they've emerged as an extensive research area for the cities and states to undertake. And heat has a growing need to address. There is this gap that I've actually highlighted in the presentation as well, that heat assessments are still too far from the statutory planning. However, the recommendations in terms of the Q&A also, as we discussed, a lot of these recommendations actually go towards the build form and managing the open space inventory, the NbS framework, etc., which can be integral to the statutory planning. But there's a long way to that. This is why the first step for every region in the city is to create SOPs and inventory of data on these things that's available as of now. And from there, moving into including it into the existing land uses and then proposed land uses in the DCRs or building bylaws around.
Yeah, thank you both for the insightful presentations, firstly, and also staying in for answering the questions from our audience. We really appreciate the time and expertise shared by you today. Um, Also, to all our attendees, we hope this session has given you actionable insights and also the motivation to incorporate heat mitigation strategies in your work. This masterclass is being recorded and will be uploaded on YouTube shortly after. If you'd like to continue this conversation, feel free to connect with us through our website. And thank you again for joining us all today, and have a wonderful rest of the evening. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Bhanu. Thanks, Shravan. Bye,
Yeah.
Shaurya.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.